Good afternoon to all of you. So I said I will give you a bit of an update of where we stand with the activities of the EMA on vaccines and therapeutics for COVID-19. Next slide. This is an outline of what I will be speaking to you about. Next one. So this slide is a kind of busy one, but also shows how busy we have been throughout this pandemic so far, and we will continue to be busy. So you will see that right from the declaration of the pandemic, beginning of next year, we immediately took action, established our expert task force, and start talking to developers of new or repurposed therapeutics and also of developers of vaccines. And we started evaluation procedures already in May last year, which led to the first approval of the first therapeutic for COVID-19, which was Vaclory in July last year. Then towards the end of last year and beginning of the new one, the vaccines came, and you see that 4 have been approved to start with. And then after the spring this year, we started doing a lot of activities with respect to approving variation of the vaccines initially approved in order to enlarge their use and the recommendation for use in pediatric population to start with. And then importantly, in October around the booster use. And also we have been approving additional therapeutics now, Requiron and Ronapreve, and I will tell you more in a few minutes. But this is just to show the intense work that has gone through in these months and that we will continue carrying on towards the end of this pandemic. Next slide. Let's start with the vaccines. And the first important statement is what is written here on these slides. So vaccines have reduced the impact of the virus, and they do remain a key tool to combat the pandemic. As you know, the Delta variant is spreading around. However, the vaccines are remaining effective, saving thousands, or I would say hundreds of thousands, from hospitalization and death. However, there is still more to do. As you know, cases of infections are rising throughout Europe, and also hospitalizations are growing as a consequence of that. However, it's important for me to underline that most hospitalization and deaths are seen in people that are not vaccinated. Even if still we are seeing that also some vaccinated people, they can get hospitalized with COVID. And this is because there are no vaccines that are 100% effective. And when you vaccinate millions of people and the virus is spreading around quite substantially, you may end up with few cases in which severe disease might occur. But still, they are a tiny proportion of the entirety of people that have been vaccinated. We are also been seeing that protection tends to wane over time. And this is not unexpected. For many vaccines, we've seen the protection decreases after the primary vaccination. And so we may need to restore that protection by using booster doses. Next slide. Indeed, we have already seen emerging data that show how booster doses are able to restore protection against infection of disease, and they confer really high level of antibodies, much higher than what we see after completion of the primary vaccination. As you know, most EU member states are already giving boosters, and the boosters for Comirnaty and Spikevax, which are the messenger RNA vaccine for Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna respectively, have been approved by the EMA with a 6 months interval after the completion of the second dose, so the primary series in adults. And this opinion came up in a timely way at the beginning of October, leaving flexibility on the use of the booster doses depending on the epidemiological situation in the countries, acknowledging that things would be moving very dynamically throughout this cold season and with respect to decision taken by public health authorities. Also, we are evaluating a booster dose for the Janssen COVID-19 vaccine that should be given from 2 months after the first dose in adults. As you know, the Janssen COVID-19 vaccine requires a single dose for completing the primary vaccination series. We have also been approving extra doses of Comirnaty and Spikevax for people with severely weakened immune systems aged 12 years and older, because we saw that indeed in this group of people that are not responding well to vaccination, a third dose is very important in order to increase the immune response. And I'm also glad to anticipate to you that today the CHMP gave a positive opinion for the use of Comirnaty in children from 5 years of age, including children that have severely weakened immune system, similarly to what we already decided here for those 12 years and older. Next slide. What about the safety of the booster doses, which is a question that has been emerging quite substantially? First of all, let me say that this is the largest vaccination campaign ever, and the safety profile that we've seen so far is very reassuring. The current data will show that the common side effects after the booster are very similar to what we've seen after the second dose of either Comirnaty or Spikevax. And now there is a growing number of people that are receiving the booster dose, and so far we are not seeing any specific safety concern emerging, which is extremely reassuring. Of course, the risk of myocarditis and pericarditis or other very rare side effects after boosting are carefully monitored, and you will hear more about what we're doing in terms of safety monitoring for vaccines for COVID-19. Next slide. Another important area of discussion has been the possibility of mix and matching different vaccines, what is called heterologous vaccination. And you see here in this slide that this heterologous vaccination could occur in the context of the primary series for vaccination, in which you give a certain type of vaccine as first dose and another type as a second one. But it can also happen in the context of heterologous boosting. In this case, maybe a single type of vaccine has been given for the primary vaccination series with 2 doses, and then a booster with a different type of vaccine is administered. And so far, what we've seen that there is a very good immune response with certain type of heterologous primary vaccination or heterologous booster vaccination schemes, which is extremely reassuring and extremely important because it will increase the flexibility in the member states on which vaccine to use in the context of primary vaccination or boosting. And EMA will be providing some recommendation based on the current evidence of what could be the best strategies to be used in the context of heterologous primary vaccination or heterologous boosting. And we are still aiming to come up with this recommendation by the end of next week or soon thereafter. Next slide. As said, a very important topic is what about the use of COVID-19 vaccines in children? And we know that severe COVID-19 and death remain quite rare among children. However, disease of all severity still occur in all the pediatric ages. Moreover, high transmission results in increased hospitalization in children of all ages, and we are seeing this according to the most recent epidemiological data from Europe and other parts of the world. Although children with underlying conditions would be more vulnerable to the consequences of the infection with this virus, healthy children do also represent the majority of pediatric hospitalization in the European Union based on the data collected from the ECDC. After COVID-19, moreover, children can suffer from what is called the multisystem inflammatory syndrome, which is quite a nasty disease and can be very severe with admission to intensive care in up to 70% of the cases. So another quite detrimental effect of infection with COVID-19 in pediatric ages. The children also can be exposed to the long-term consequences of COVID-19, which is currently poorly understood and would go into the generic name of long COVID or post-acute COVID. But we have the impression that we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg, and we need to learn more about what this means and what really is the burden of disease associated with the long-term consequences of infection with this virus in the pediatric population. Next slide. So from an EMA perspective, as said before, the two messenger RNA vaccine, Comirnaty and Spikevax, have been approved for the use in children from 12 years of age. And also, as said, I'm glad to tell you that Comirnaty from today has received approval for children 5 to 11 years of age. And this is based on a different dose than the one used in adults, essentially is a much lower dose. Spikevax is under review for a very similar age group, so from 6 to 11 years old. Member states are then able to decide on how to use this vaccine in children as part of their vaccination campaign. But EMA is always working together with the ECDC, trying to give all the support that we can to national authorities in helping them with making their decisions. Next slide. Another important area is what the impact of COVID-19 in pregnancy and how much vaccines could help here as well. COVID-19 indeed can be particularly dangerous for pregnant women, and vaccination offers them protection. We have seen already data that clearly show that the messenger RNA vaccine are able to prevent COVID-19 in this vulnerable group. And also studies on safety of the messenger RNA vaccine in pregnancy are at the moment not suggesting any safety concern. Considering that now we are seeing pregnant women going to hospital because of COVID and also to the intensive care, it's very important that we consider vaccination in this vulnerable group in order to save the life of the mothers and the children. Next slide. So, as you know, our process requires that we continue maintaining our standard with respect to quality, safety, and efficacy of the medicinal products and the vaccine, but at the same time trying to speed up as much as we can in order that effective vaccines and therapeutics can reach patients in need and the general population as soon as possible. And in the context of the conditional marketing authorization that was granted for all the COVID-19 vaccine up to date, we have been recently renewing for another year this authorization for 3 of them, Spikevax, Comirnaty, and Lagevrio. And at the same time, we are trying to look into a way of accelerating the process to come up with a full marketing authorization as soon as we can. And so there will be more to follow in this area as well. Next slide. You can see here on our website all the information with respect to what the EMA is doing with respect to COVID-19 vaccine, which one have been authorized, which one are under evaluation or rolling review, and where we stand overall with the appraisal of vaccines for COVID. Next slide. With respect to vaccines that are in more advanced evaluation stage, Paxlovid, which is the vaccines from Novavax, which is the first protein-based vaccine, is undergoing an evaluation for marketing authorization. This is based essentially on the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is a key protein on the surface of the virus that acts a bit as the key in order for the virus to enter into the cells in our body. It also contains an adjuvant that helps strengthen the immune response to the vaccine. The start of the final assessment after rolling review has been completed, and now we are entering to the final phase of the evaluation. And we do really hope to conclude on this vaccine as soon as we can. Next slide. There are other vaccines that are still undergoing rolling review by the EMA, and the 3 of them, you see them on this slide. The first one is the one called Sputnik 5. We started rolling review in March. It's based on 2 different adenoviruses as viral vector, so in a kind of heterologous vaccination, and is developed by the Gamaleya National Center of Epidemiology and Microbiology. Then we got another vaccine, which is called the CoronaVac. This vaccine is based on another platform technology. Essentially, is a whole virus that has been inactivated, so killed and used in order to generate an immune response that will be protective. And this is developed by Sinovac Life Science. And the third one that is under rolling review is called Vitreftin. this is based on a more traditional technology similarly to the Novavax one. So it's the spike protein with an adjuvanting system, and this is developed by Sanofi Pasteur. Next slide. Now, moving away from vaccines and entering into the area of therapeutics, it's important for me to start by saying that therapeutics could be extremely important in order to complement but not replace the role the vaccines have in the fight against COVID-19. New or repurposed therapeutic could treat or prevent COVID-19, and we've seen quite a large evidence on a number of investigational agents in this regard. They are therefore expected to provide an additional tool to reduce the burden of disease associated with COVID-19. And we could argue that therapeutics would be particularly relevant for vulnerable groups and people who do not respond adequately for vaccination. Next slide. So what kind of products are we talking about? Essentially, we have two big areas of type of medicine. The first one are so-called biological medicine and include neutralizing monoclonal antibodies, which are made of proteins that are able to attach to the virus and stopping it from entering into the cells in our body and therefore preventing the spread of the virus and the severe symptoms that will occur once the virus is spreading. Others, on the contrary, will work as immunomodulatory agents, so with a very different mechanism of action, and they are aimed to reduce the activity of the body's immune system with the aim of reducing inflammation and ultimately respiratory failure and death. Some other agents are chemical medicine. They can be small antiviral molecules that can be given orally, which is a big advantage. And they can act on different targets within the virus, either the polymerase, which is the machinery for creating new viral particles, or certain specific proteins like the protease, which are necessary for assembling viruses that can then proliferate into the body. Other chemical agents work as immunomodulatory agents, so similarly to some of the biologics, and they would help to stabilize the abnormal immune responses that we see once the disease is progressing and patient gets severe COVID. Next slide. And you can find here on our website all information as well on therapeutic, as I just mentioned, but also even more. Next slide. So far we got 3 therapeutics agents authorized in the European Union. As mentioned before, Vaclorir, that is based on remdesivir, has been the first one to be approved for the treatment of COVID in people from 12 years of age with pneumonia requiring extra oxygen. And as said, recently we approved these 2 monoclonal antibodies product. The first one is based on the monoclonal called remdesivir, which is approved for the treatment of COVID-19 in adults at increased risk of severe disease. So before really they get a COVID that requires hospitalization. And a similar indication has been granted for Ronapreve, which is based on a cocktail of 2 monoclonal antibodies, casirivimab and imdevimab. And also this cocktail has been approved for the prevention of COVID-19 in people from 12 years of age on top of the treatment of disease indication similarly to remdesivir. Next slide. But there are many more that we are evaluating. And you see here on this slide the 3 specific immunomodulatory agents that we are evaluating for marketing authorization. The first one is based on baricitinib, which is a repurposed agent. All of them actually, they are repurposed agents. And this one is for the treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized patients from 10 years of age who require extra oxygen. Similar indications are also going to be looked at for anakinra, which is another immunomodulatory agent, and tocilizumab as well, which has been quite widely discussed since the start of the pandemic as a potential option for treatment of severe COVID. And we do really hope that at least for some of these agents, we will be able to come up with an approval before the end of this year. Next slide. Then there are 2 products that have already started the actual marketing authorization as new therapeutics, so not repurposed agents. One is sotrovimab, which is another monoclonal antibodies for a similar indication as the other one that I mentioned just earlier. And then the second one is molnupiravir, Lagevrio, which is one of these small molecule antivirals that can be given by oral route and therefore are quite attractive considering that they are supposed to be used essentially in the community. Next slide. And also under rolling review, there is another agent, which is another cocktail of monoclonal antibody composed of tixagevimab and silgavimab under the name of Evusheld. And this one, really, the development has been initially focused on the prevention of COVID-19 in adults, although there are also studies emerging with respect to the treatment, similarly to what we're seeing with the other monoclonals. So the pipeline of antiviral agents is quite lively and quite robust, and we do really hope that in the near future we will be able to conclude at least with some of them. Next slide. Specifically, with respect to the oral antivirals, Lagevrio, so based on molnupiravir, but also an additional one that is called the Paxlovid, which is developed by Pfizer for a similar indication as molnupiravir. We have been looking into the preliminary evidence that has become available, at least with respect to molnupiravir. We were able to give an advice to member states with respect to the potential use in the context of emergency use for this antiviral agent, and we will do the same also for Paxlovid should the evidence that we have be sufficient to do so. We think that this is very important since we don't have an emergency use authorization at European level, and this can be used as a kind of surrogate in order to support member states' decision with respect to the emergency use of these antiviral drugs. Next slide. So this is my conclusive slide. And first of all, let me reiterate that vaccines protect against the heavy burden of disease and death related to COVID-19 and remain the crucial tool in the fight against this pandemic. Infections, as you know, are growing in Europe as a result of the spread of the Delta variant, the cold season, the waning immunity after the primary vaccination, and relaxation of social measures in many places. Vaccination coverage in some places is unfortunately still very low, leaving many unvaccinated people vulnerable to severe disease. Now it's time to fill this vaccination gap, and we should do this as soon as we can as a top priority. Booster doses in parallel are also very important since they are able to restore the protection of people who already had the primary cycle and bring back the same level of protection from infection and disease. Besides vaccines, safe and effective therapeutics will be extremely helpful in the fight against COVID-19, but they do not replace vaccination. So they should be seen as a complementary tool, very important because unfortunately many more people will get sick with this virus. European citizens are encouraged to get vaccinated and follow public health measures recommended by the authorities in order to keep themselves safe and the infection levels low. We are pretty confident that with all these tools and all with these measures, we will be able to cut down the burden of disease associated with this virus and end this pandemic in the near future. I will stop here and I will hand over to my colleague, Georg Benov, who will talk about what we're doing around safety monitoring. Over to you, Georg.